Happy Thanksgiving, America. I'm Donna, and I'm here with my friends to tell you the real history behind this holiday. Growing up, I knew that what they told you in school about Thanksgiving wasn't true. That's not the true story. The true story behind Thanksgiving was after every killing of a whole village, these European settlers celebrated it, and they called it Thanksgiving. But it wasn't until Abraham Lincoln became president that it became an official holiday.
He ordered 38 Dakota men to be hung for war crimes.
After the sacred holiday Christmas,
we take this time to remember our elders who lost their lives due to what really happened. Usually my mom makes a Native American dish for us and we pray.
Growing up, I would be kind of annoyed that they didn't know what actually happened on Thanksgiving and that they're actually celebrating the deaths of many people and many tribes that were lost.
whether it's to give thanks or to be with your family, you should learn how the holiday was established in the first place.
I'm thankful for being born indigenous to this continent.
I'm thankful that I still have my culture.
I'm thankful that my elders kept our culture alive all these years.
I'm thankful to be indigenous, resilient, and alive.
I'm thankful for us all to be able to stand together, stand strong, and stand as one.
Happy Thanksgiving, America.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back.
Shalom, shalom, shalom. What's going on, everyone? This is the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, started out of 1 West, 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under commanding General Yohana. And since 1969, we have been teaching that the so-called blacks, so-called Hispanics, and so-called Native Americans are the real children of God. We are the real nation of Israel. We make up the 12 tribes of Israel according to the Bible. That is who we are biblically. We've been teaching our people the truth of who they are, giving them back their identity, their culture, their language, and exposing the crimes and wickedness of all these other races and nations of people that have committed atrocities towards us, God's chosen people. Now, we just saw a little excerpt from Teen Vogue did something a few years back where they had some indigenous woman do a little maybe 2-minute snippet about Thanksgiving and the real history about Thanksgiving. Some of us may know and some of us may have forgotten, since we don't celebrate Esau's or America's wicked holidays, that Thanksgiving, the so-called Thanksgiving, was a day of slaughter, the day of a genocide of our brothers and sisters from the tribe of Gad and from the Seminole Nation as well, right? The Gadites and the Reubenites, so-called North American Indians and the Seminole Indians, right? But Thanksgiving is the slaughter and genocide of all of our people, because when the so-called Negroes were slaves, they were still being slaughtered and oppressed as well. But today, we're going to be focusing on the race riots that happened down in Houston, Texas. Everyone give Houston, Texas a hand. Well, let me turn on my little soundboard here. Let that load up. This weekend, actually, instead of celebrating that disgusting holiday that people call Thanksgiving, we're going to be celebrating the Texas or the Down South Cookout that they host every year annually for the Black, Hispanic, and Native American community down south. Let's give a big shout out to Captain Kahuntam Yad out there, and also Captain Yad Tazak, and all the Adawanyam and brothers and sisters that have been working diligently day in and day out to put this event together for the next 4 days, starting on the 23rd of November all the way to Sunday, the November 26th. So big shout out to the Akiam and Adawanyam out there. Right. It's going to be great. I want to say tawada to General Mahaiman for allowing me to teach today's class. General Mahaiman wasn't feeling too well, so I've been honored to be able to teach today's history class for the nation. Monday night history class. I am Priest Ashagapan with the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge. We're here at HQ, Jerusalem, Harlem, New York. Damn right. Joining me, I have Priest and Officer Ashaya Allah. He's holding down Shamar and the computer work. I even have Sister Sitar Banaf in here. How you doing, sis? Shalom. How's everything? You look like you was freezing out there. You all bundled up. It is. It's brick outside. As we used to say back in the 80s and 90s, it's brick.
It got cold quick out here.
Yeah, it got cold. It crept up on us. So today we're going to be discussing race riots. The Houston race riot that happened down in Houston, Texas in 1917, where a black man, an army man, a black soldier, was said to have been beaten and possibly unalived by white police officers, which sparked a mass protest and riot by the 3rd Battalion, 24th Infantry, if I'm correct by saying that correctly. A big group of black soldiers that went in support of their brother who they thought was unalived by white police officers, and they stormed Houston. They marched for 2 hours to get justice for their brother. So what we're going to do, like we would do normally on a Monday class, we have some visuals, we have audio, we have some articles to go into that help you retain this information, because as myself and Officer Ashayala were discussing earlier, none of us knew about this growing up. None of us heard about this in school, in the public school education system, right? And it's not a surprise that we were not taught this in school, that this was not in the curriculum throughout the entire nation of the United States, especially since this involves black military men, black servicemen, right? All right, we got the applause going on. All right, so what we're gonna do is let's roll the film. Want to share the screen and click that one, expand it, Baba Kasha, on the. There we go. Perfect. You can leave just like that. Press play, Baba Kasha. Wait, but stop before you press play. This is a documentary that they're going over the historical facts, but they're also doing a reenactment. So there's actors that are reading lines and speeches from a manuscript that was taken from that time period. All right, keep going.
My name is John H. Crooker, and I am Criminal District Attorney, Harris County, Texas. I was informed of the mutiny and riots of the Negro soldiers of the 24th Infantry about 9 o'clock on the night of its occurrence.
About 3:30 p.m., we heard that Corporal Baltimore of our company had been shot by police officers. All the boys said, "Let's go get the man that shot Baltimore."
One grabbed me and pushed me out in front of him with his gun and started shooting at me. Earl seemed dazed and couldn't get out from under the wheel. And when this Negro shot me, they all seemed to go crazy, started shooting Earl. I fell flat in the ditch and lay there as if dead. They let me alone.
Headshot.
Get out! This is my house. You ain't got no right to be here.
I think we're gonna have trouble tonight.
What kind of trouble, Sergeant?
Major trouble.
You all right?
And this was just the beginning of a night.
Now, no, you don't have to change anything. Now, what we're about to see is we're going to start breaking down the facts, the timeline, and what actually led up to this riot, this so-called what they call it, mutiny that the American Army considered this to be. We're going to see all the prejudice and the segregation and the crimes against black people that led up to this animosity or this hatred or this strong dislike for the treatment that they were being shown by the white community, especially our black brothers who were enlisted in the army, how they expected to be treated better because they were representing the United States Army. Go ahead.
Night of terror, all but forgotten in the history of Houston. A night in which some 16 Houstonians, including 5 police officers, lost their lives. 5 soldiers were also killed. The riot resulted in martial law in Houston and ultimately led to the largest military trial in U.S. history.
The thing that always fascinates me is that nobody knows the story, or very few people do.
And he's absolutely right. This McGee guy, this historian, I didn't learn about this. Y'all didn't learn about this. Sister, have you ever heard about this? Let's go to the chat. Anyone in the chat, maybe if you're from Houston or you grew up in a military family, you may have learned about this. But if you have learned about this particular incident, please put a 1 in the chat for me, Baba Kasha. Put a 1 in the chat. Scroll up, Baba Kasha. Keep going, keep going. Go all the way to the top. All right. The sign-in sheet has been put into the chat as well. So make sure you scroll up to get the sign-in sheet and get counted for your attendance. Keep scrolling down, Baba Kasha. Put a 1 in the chat if you have learned about this before. Okay. So far, no one yet. All right. Keep rolling.
It's a fascinating and tragic story, born of a climate of racial tensions that were embedded in law. This is the story of what has come to be known as the Camp Logan riots, when toward the end of a long Houston summer, a group of African-American soldiers declared a mutiny on the bayou.
Now, this is a quote from a woman back in in the early 1900s. You know, their whole life, especially our brothers and sisters that were in the South and had stayed in the South, their whole life they thought that they were slaves. Their whole life they were accustomed to being treated a certain way. Just like this sister Hazel Young is going to say in this reenactment, all her life all she knew was to sit in the back of the bus. All her life she knew that she was supposed to sit in the back of the streetcar or the trolley car. This was a common practice and an acceptance in black people's minds that they were always to be in the back, while white citizens were to always have the greatness of everything, sit in the front of the line, have the best foods, have access to all the best things in life, and we had to take the back of the bus. We had to sit in the back and take the scraps and take all the leftovers and hand-me-downs. Keep going. Shout out Houston.
Houston, Texas, 1917. Population 130,000, including 30,000 African Americans, the largest black population of any Texas city. Houston covered a total of 32 square miles on either side of Buffalo Bayou, and the town was on the threshold of a period of rapid growth. The citizens shared a sense of excitement about Houston's future. With 13 banks, 365 factories employing 10,000 workers, and annual exports of more than 3 million bales of cotton, Houston proudly claimed to be the largest inland port cotton market in the world.
And that's all because of slave labor. Houston was very proud, just like all the other southern states and cities in those states were very proud of their slave labor, their free labor that they got from Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans that made their states and their cities and many people extremely wealthy. Keep going.
White and black citizens lived in two separate worlds. In fact, it was the law.
And that happens even to this day. Black people and white people, Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans live in a completely separate and different world than white people. White people rule this earth, while Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are at the bottom of every society in every country that we are in. We are always at the bottom, right? Keep going.
Black Houstonians had their own saloons and restaurants, 4 movie houses, 3 weekly newspapers, and a separate professional baseball team called the Houston Black Buffaloes.
It was.
But during this time, after slavery, like we have been learning about throughout all these history classes every Monday, Black people got together and were able to create a society for themselves, a community for themselves. Hispanic and Native American people were able to start a process of thriving and becoming stronger and gaining wealth, growing a society that was based on morals and being able to love one another. Here is a prominent example down in Houston where Black folks were able to create this wealth for themselves. As you heard, all the type of businesses that they had. They even had a Black baseball team, which was part of the Negro League that we discussed on last week's Monday history class. Keep going.
It was a very, very difficult time and place to live, never mind work and recreate and raise families. And this riot, this mutiny, is a manifestation of those social conditions.
After the Civil War, most Southern states passed what were known as Jim Crow laws, creating separate arrangements for Blacks and whites in schools, on public transportation, in restaurants, hotels, theaters, public parks, even doctors' offices. Some form of these laws remained in Houston and throughout the South until the early 1960s. It is difficult for most of us to imagine what things were like way back when, but Thelma Scott Bryant, Hazel Young, and Henrietta Wells lived through it.
The white man expected you to stay in your place, they say, and we knew how to stay in our place rather than, cause a lot of trouble. That was just the way it had to be at that time. You got out your place, well, then they put you back in it. No matter how intelligent you were, if you were Black, you didn't get any kind of recognition because white people resented smart niggas, as they say. Yeah. In fact, it went out of the way to show you didn't have any. They didn't respect you. I thought I was supposed to.
And they never will respect you. That's why all this commotion right now that's happening with the Israelis and the Palestinians, white people respect their enemies, right? These Arabs have an army. We do not. These Arabs have governments and countries that they rule. We do not. All these other nations, white people respect because they have respect for their military might. They have respect for their wealth, their contributions to the worldwide economic global market. But for Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, we don't have a government. We don't have our own military. We don't have resources that people have to rely on us that we can control and dictate, like how Arabs do with oil, or how Africans can do with diamonds and all types of precious metals in Africa. Like how the Arabs in Palestine, how part of Palestine that is on a certain portion of the Mediterranean Sea has a wealth and abundance of oil and natural gases, right? They respect that. But for us, we're not looked at as an enemy. They don't have respect for us. We're looked upon as slaves, and every other nation on earth also looks upon us as slaves because we are the only ones that do not fight back. We're the only ones that do not have the capability of fighting back. We're the only ones that refuse to accept righteous and correct leadership in order to come out of this oppressive state that we've been in for centuries. No one respects a slave, but everyone respects their enemy. Keep going.
To sit on the back of the bush. That was a part of growing up in the South. You knew your place, and your place was in the back.
She said, and we knew our place. Let me get that scripture in Deuteronomy chapter 28. You can make the documentary a smaller screen, Bubba. I think it's number 5. Let's get Deuteronomy chapter 7 and 6. And after that, we're going to go to Deuteronomy 28 and 1. All right? Because this sister, I'm not sure if she is still with us or if she's with the Lord right now. because this documentary took place quite a few years ago, and they both were 100 years old back then. Go back to stream your Baba Kasha. Perfect. Thank you. Can you read the scripture?
Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6. For thou art an holy people.
A what?
An holy people.
Now, this sister, she said that we had to know our place, or we knew our place. Our place back then was to sit in the back, was to be unseen, was to be unheard, was to be a slave. But what does the Lord say?
For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God.
And this sister was right. We were separate from these people. We should have known our place. However, what this sister didn't know then, as we do now, is that we do know our place. Our place is to be holy. Our place is to be separated from all these white people, all these Arabs, all these East Indians, all these Asians and Aboriginal people of Hawaii and New Zealand and Australia. We should know our place. And here in the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, we damn sure know our place. Our place is to be holy. Our place is to be set apart from every other nation of people that are on the face of this earth. Keep going, Baba Gasha.
The Lord thy God hath chosen thee.
What?
Hath chosen thee.
See, white people will get you to accept mentally through bondage and psychological slavery that he is the chosen people. He gives you a white Jesus Christ in Christianity, in Catholicism, right? And all these other witchcraft religions or beliefs, many of them uses Christian teachings or Catholic teachings. They give you a white image of Christ, a white image of God, a white image of little naked baby angels flying around and floating in the sky. They give you a white image of the so-called Virgin Mary. They give you the white image of the 12 disciples that followed Christ. Everything that is great in this society can be linked back to the white image. And the white man will make you believe that he is the chosen person. He comes from the chosen race, and you do not. But according to this scripture here, read it again.
For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee.
Stay right there. Stay in your spot right here. The Lord chose us. Moses was speaking to the Israelites when they were in the wilderness. The Israelites are not the Israelis. Those Israelis are not the same people as the Israelites in the Bible. If you try to look up the word Israeli in the Bible, you will not find it. If you try to find the word Jewish in the Bible, you will not find it. You will find the nation of Israel. You will find Israelites. You will find the names of the different tribes like Judah, Levi, Benjamin, Issachar, Ephraim, Manasseh, Reuben. You'll find all these names, but you will not find Israeli and you will not find Jewish. And the Lord chose a specific people, and it's definitely not the so-called white man. It's absolutely not the so-called Israeli Jewish man. Those are not the people that the Lord chose. The Lord chose the same people that the entire earth looks down upon, and that is the so-called Negroes scattered all throughout the world. That is the so-called Native Americans that have been called Indians or Hispanics and Latinos. We are that people that the Lord chose. Please continue.
Above all people that are upon the face of the earth.
What?
Above all people that are upon the face of the earth.
So the Lord had chosen us to be above every people on the face of the earth. This sister, unfortunately, due to slavery and the forced religion of Christianity, in her mind, she had already accepted that her place, that black people's place, that Hispanic people's place, that Native Americans' place was to be in the back, was to be a slave, was to be less than this white image in this white society governed by white people. And that's all that we have known here in America for the past 400 years. But here, according to the Bible, which Christians have in their church, which Catholics have in their nightstands, right? Which almost every major Christian denomination has a Bible. God said that he chose the Israelites to be a special people above everyone. Now, this sister, she hopefully the Lord will allow her spirit to come back in today's day and age. That way her spirit can accept that we are supposed to be above everyone on the face of this earth. Please continue.
That's the end of the verse.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Go to Deuteronomy 28:1. Because it's about time that black people understood how important and special they are. It's about time that Native Americans and so-called Latinos and Hispanics understood just how precious they are. Please read.
Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 1. And it shall come to pass.
Now, this was going to happen if, keep going,
if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God.
If they had listened diligently, very carefully, right? If they had listened with great intent, heed this warning, this advice that Moses was giving to them. Keep going.
To observe and to do all his commandments.
All his what?
All his commandments.
All we had to do as Black, Hispanic, and Native American people was to observe and to do all the commandments that God had given us, all the laws and statutes that God had given us, because by then we can know how to govern ourselves, we can know how to treat ourselves, we can have a proper army, we can keep resources within our communities, we can build a mighty kingdom for the Lord. Keep going.
Which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high.
On what?
On high.
The Lord would have set us on high. Instead of being in the back of the bus, we would have been the only ones allowed on the bus. We would have been the ones who owned the bus. We would have been the ones who owned the bus company. We would have been the ones who owned the bus company, who owned the bus filled with nothing but us on a street paved and owned by us in a city, in a town, in a state, in a country, in an empire on this earth, which actually belongs to us. We would have been set on high. Keep going.
Above all the nations of the earth.
We would have been above everyone. Our slave master, our oppressor, the so-called white man here in America, we would have been above them, and we still can be. It's going to start with us accepting our place in this society. Our place in this society is not in the back of the bus. Our place in this society is rulership. Our men are to be a nation of kings and priests. Our sisters are supposed to be a nation of princesses and wives, mothers to families. That is our place in the society. Rulership under God with our king, who the world calls Jesus Christ, but in the Hebrew, Yahweh Mashiach, that is our king who should be ruling this kingdom over the entire earth. Drop down. Let's go back to this documentary, Bubba Show. Let's check on StreamYard. Let's see if there's any questions or comments. Mark Israel said, what? The area where this took place is known as the Galilee area. Yep. They even have a plaque around there as well. Let's see who else.
A lot of brothers and sisters saying shalom.
All right, so all the brothers that are tuning in, shalom. Yahweh Bashim Shabbat. To the sisters, Yahweh Shemal Thun Bashim Yahweh Shai. Welcome to Monday's Night History class. I'm Priest Shargapan, and I am covering for General Mahaiman today. And today we're going over the race riots that happened down in Houston in 1917. You want to say something?
Oh, shout out to Officer Kayadwan in Alaska, one of the only brothers who put a one.
Kayadwan to Alaska. Wow. Okay. It's cold up there, brother. I'm sorry. Don't worry. Passover's around the corner. You'll be in some warm weather soon, you know? All right, let's get right to it, Bubba Shah, with the documentary. You got to share, okay? Thank you, brother.
Of the bus. I resented the segregation on the streetcars because when I came back from college, I resented it more. I had to get up and give the workers, the street workers and the construction workers, my seats. And they were dirty people. I thought they needed a bath.
And she's absolutely right. They are dirty people. If you look up and throughout history, who taught white people who were living in caves and in the mountains how to bathe, how to sanitize themselves, how to not eat out of the skulls of their ancestors? Who taught them how to read and take baths? We did. They are a dirty people. They are naturally, historically, biblically, a disgusting and dirty people. This is not, lies that we're making up. Any person with a smartphone in their hand, you can just Google the type of conditions that they used to live in, like during the Black Plague, and how dirty Europe was, how disgusting that Europeans, these white people, turned Europe. They destroyed Europe and made it filled with disease. Yeah.
Have you seen this video going around? Some Edomites put it out to scientifically justify not washing your legs in the shower.
That's absolutely insane. I've seen videos where they said it's not good to take a bath and clean yourself too often. So they take baths every 3 days or 4 days. I don't know what scientists co-sign that. That just sounds like a lot of garbage to us. In the Bible, see, you can find, I think it's in the book of Leviticus, where it's talking about the laws of cleanliness. In the Bible, it tells us how we need to maintain our cleanliness. When a woman gives birth, how we need to maintain sanitary conditions and cleanliness. When someone is bleeding and has a disease, how we need to maintain cleanliness and sanitary conditions. You got it?
Not yet.
No, keep looking for it, brother. Right? There's laws in the Bible that dictate how we are supposed to stay clean. We are a very clean and sanitary people. Unlike the so-called Israelis and the so-called Jewish man, they are very dirty. They are very dirty people. I don't know about you, but I've been into a few Jewish people's homes throughout my time living on this earth, and it always smells. It's very dirty. They look like they are not taking care of their basic hygienic needs as well. I see so many of them with crust around their lips from I guess drool and not what, I don't know what it is. Go ahead.
They're not the same people that got on Christ and the apostles for not washing their hands.
Yes, those they are not the same people that we read about in the Bible. They could not be. For you to have the holy book and the word of God, and God talks about cleanliness, and you are not a clean race of people, that's just a big red flag that indicates that you are not who you claim falsely to believe. You got it?
Leviticus 10:10, right before going into all the different laws on cleanliness, it says, and that you may put difference between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean.
Exactly. Go to the Riots of Yatzazar. If you could go to Leviticus 15, Baba Kasha. Leviticus 15. We have laws that tell us how to stay clean and how to stay sanitary. And since the Riots of Yatzazar, make sure you check out Yatzazar apparel. Today's the day. Today is the cutoff for you to pre-order these amazing 144 jackets. Make sure you hit up Officer Yatzazar. You can check him out at Yatzazar Apparel on Facebook or Yatzazar on Facebook. You got it? Leviticus 15.
I think it's just the whole chapter in general is talking about the fact that you have to bathe yourself after you have an issue, after a man emits seed.
Read something from Leviticus. Everyone at home, we're going to read just a quick snippet. But for you, for proper edification and for your knowledge, read Leviticus 15 on your own time. That way you can get a better understanding of how we are actually a clean race of people. Keep going.
Leviticus 15:2. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when any man hath a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue he is unclean, and this shall be his uncleanness and his issue. Whether his flesh run with his issue, or his flesh be stopped from his issue, it is uncleanness. Every bed whereon he lieth that hath the issue is unclean. Everything whereon he sitteth shall be unclean. And whosoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even.
Stop. That's just a few scriptures from the Bible talking about being clean and unclean, and how if there's an issue, a disease, pus flowing out from a wound or something like that, there's ways to maintain a sanitary condition, right? To quarantine that individual until the issue has been dealt with and has passed on. or if something that is more serious than that, right? But to go back to what this sister said, she was upset that she had to sit in the back of the bus. She was upset that she had to give up her seat. She went to college. A college educated person shouldn't have to give up their seat to some dirty white construction worker.
Right.
A college student shouldn't have to move to the back of the bus so a white man who's been in the sewers all day can have a seat. See, in this kingdom, we have no choice but to do the things that our oppressors tell us to do. Or we can decide to obey the Lord and be able to do what we need and want to do. Please keep going with the documentary.
They didn't smell good. But I had to get up and give them my seat. And I didn't like the fact that I couldn't try on clothes. I couldn't try on shoes. I couldn't try on hats. I might buy something and take it home and it didn't look right, but I couldn't return it. I had to keep it. There were so many things like that that were demeaning.
I think most people today honestly have a lack of appreciation for how truly awful race relations were at this time period.
Of course, because black people weren't taught this in school. Hispanic people aren't taught this in school. Native Americans are not taught these things in school because who owns the educational system here in America? Our so-called oppressor, the white man. They control the medias. They control what's on television. They control what is written and printed in the history books that we are forced to accept and retain this information and regurgitate this on tests. Try putting the answer that Christopher Columbus did not discover America on a test. You will be wrong. Right? These are things that we have to deal with living in this society. I know many brothers and sisters have their own children, and they are constantly having to reinforce the lies that their children are learning in schools and actually give them the correct information that way their children can understand what actually happened. We don't know this growing up because we aren't taught this information. And that's exactly why we don't understand the importance, the sensitivity of race relations here in America. Because the race that controls America wants them to be seen in the most magical, magnificent, mystical, and holy and separate viewpoint and light, as opposed to us, where we're still at the bottom of the barrel. Please keep going.
You're talking about the very depths of white supremacy, which were in many ways worse than slavery. This was a volcano ready to erupt.
The police were pretty tough in that area. They loved to chase prostitutes, crap shooters, and they had a tendency to shoot at blacks to scare them and to show their.
That's no different today, where black unarmed men are being unalived by white police officers or just the police force in general, right? This is something that still happens to this day. Keep going.
Their virility.
The new reform-minded mayor had begun some major changes in the Houston Police Department. He appointed a new chief, Clarence Brock, who had been the park superintendent and had no law enforcement experience, a move that met with strong resentment and resistance on the force.
What Brock was trying to do was professionalize the police, trying to bring discipline, trying to make officers look like police in terms of their dress and demeanor. And I mean, they just laughed at him, and he didn't have the force of personality to do it.
On the surface, things seemed relatively peaceful, but there was an undercurrent of prejudice that could flare up in an instant, and sometimes with overwhelming force. And into this complex racial climate came the men of the 24th Regiment.
At the beginning of the war, the U.S. government established a number of National Guard training sites across the United States. There were 16 of them. And the cities bid for them. because they realized that this would be a great deal of federal money, construction money, and all coming into the communities.
Houston leaders pursued their share of this business, and the Army agreed to build a training base for National Guard troops being recalled to active duty, a base to be known as Camp Logan, on the eastern edge of what is now Memorial Park. To guard the construction site, the Army decided to use members of the 24th Infantry, also known as the Buffalo Soldiers, a name given them in respect for their skill and bravery by the Native Americans whom they fought against in Texas and Indiana.
Mark Israel that made that comment earlier is actually Memorial Park, like they just stated a few moments ago. Keep going, please.
In territories. They had earned this respect again and again through over 4 decades of service, including the pursuit of Pancho Villa in Mexico under General Blackjack Pershing, and serving in Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt during the Spanish-American War.
The 4 Buffalo Soldier regiments, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, and the 24th and 25th Infantry, they served out west. They built camps, forts, railroads, delivered the mail, strung telegraph wires, charting the land. They did all of these types of things. Without the Buffalo Soldiers, the westward movement would have been delayed 50 years.
And that's going to be a great topic for another class, the Buffalo Soldiers, right? Because these men accomplished great feats. They went to war. Even the Native Americans, their brothers, would hold them in high regard and praise them highly because of their how valiant they were in warfare, right? Keep going.
Jesse Moore of Louisiana was among the black soldiers sent to Houston. Angela Holder is his great niece.
And I was about 6 years old, and I saw this picture of my Aunt Lovey's house, and I said, well, who is that? She said, that's my brother Jesse. And I said, well, what happened to him? I wanted to know all these whys and wins.
Later in junior high school, Angela Holder saw a picture in an American history book that prompted her to ask more questions about her great uncle.
One thing I remember my mother was saying that he may have been in the service before, and that he was a bugler, and that he wanted to go back into the service, but his mother didn't want him to do it, that there might have been some type of premonition that something bad was going to happen to him.
24-year-old Private T.C. Hawkins was from a large family and grew up in North Carolina. He was one of 7 children, the grandson of a minister. He was raised in a close-knit religious family.
My aunt told me that my uncle was a great person, that he was a really super guy. And you had a group of colored soldiers, as they preferred to be called, that were proud to serve their country, that were proud to participate in the military.
And when the soldiers came, they came to Antioch. All the young ladies and the little ones too.
Now, sidebar, all you sisters out there, listen very closely. Keep going.
Admiring those soldiers from Chicago who came to our church. I was 12 years old looking up at soldiers who were looking better than anybody I had ever seen. I was trying to be seen too. Those are our heroes.
We did not know any soldiers personally, except the ladies were all trying to marry a soldier. I have a soldier boyfriend.
While the black community was excited.
You heard that, ladies? Make sure you get yourself a UPK soldier.
Yeah, right.
Commander General Yohana does nothing but breed soldiers here in the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge. You want a good-looking man who's a soldier, who's a hero, make sure you contact General Mahaiman. He'll tell you exactly what you have to do to get yourself a UPK soldier who's a hero. And shout out to North Carolina. They're going to be hosting the ISUPK 55th annual Passover down there in Durham. Last year, the 54th was in Raleigh. It's going to be in Durham, North Carolina this year. Shout out to all those brothers that are working hard to put this Passover together. Shout out to y'all brothers right there. Continue.
Many white Houstonians were alarmed to hear black troops were stationed in Houston. Outside the black community, the soldiers quickly encountered a level of disrespect and discrimination they had seldom experienced before.
Well, to send soldiers from the north to a deeply southern ingrained town was just like waving a red flag. They resented those soldiers who looked better and had more evidently on the ball than the white people did. It was a situation that was tense.
So you have a town like Houston, it's more southern than western, and although we consider it to be in the west, but the attitude at the time, the Jim Crow laws, the segregation, all of these things were going on, and you mix that with proud black men in blue uniforms, and you have a tragedy waiting to happen.
There were racial incidents.
And that's how all these atrocities happened. The jealousy of our oppressor. That's how Black Wall Street was destroyed. That's how Seneca Village was destroyed. That's how Rosewood was destroyed, because of the jealousy of our oppressor. Whenever they see who they consider to be their slave, us, God's people, they get jealous over that. When we're doing well, when we're prospering, when we're thriving, when we look good, like these soldiers looked, how they look better than just the average white citizen down there in Houston, then that's when they lean towards violence to act upon and hurt those individuals like us. Keep going.
From the very beginning. And that is to say that this came from various parts of the community. The white construction workers gave them a difficult time. The police of Houston particularly were felt to be vindictive against the soldiers. And might seem to be somewhat ironical, but the streetcar conductors were also considered to be very negative toward them.
The tension would continue to mount, and less than a month later, erupt in a night of violence.
Mutiny.
Go to the first article that I have up there. Let me just see that. Scroll up. No, the next one, Bob Show. Next one. Yes. Let's share this and let's read some of this to get more of a backstory as we continue this documentary, Bob Show. This is from the scroll up one more time. This is from the Texas State Historical Association. This is an article that they printed, and this is by scroll up. Keep going. This is by Robert V. Haynes. Keep going. Read, Bob Show.
In the spring of 1917, shortly after the United States declared war on Germany, the War Department, taking advantage of the temperate climate and newly opened Houston Ship Channel, ordered 2 military installations built in Harris County, Camp Logan and Ellington Field. The Illinois National Guard was to train at Camp Logan, located on the northwest outskirts of the city. To guard the construction site, on July 27, 1917, the Army ordered the 3rd Battalion of the Black 24th United States Infantry to travel by train with 7 white officers from the regimental encampment at Columbus, New Mexico, to Houston. From the outset, the black contingent faced racial discrimination.
It's what?
Racial discrimination.
We were just talking about that, and we heard about that here in the documentary. They face racial discrimination even though they're serving in the white man's military, even though they're risking their lives for the white man's country and society and way of life. They still faced racial discrimination. Here in 2023, a black, Hispanic, or Native American person joining the white man's armed forces, whether it's the military, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Space Force, whatever force it is, you're still going to face racial discrimination. Like we have a young lady that's a picture of a sister hanging here on the wall who was raped, who was brutally molested while in the Army, who had her body mutilated and covered up with bleach so that way the people who committed this horrendous crime could get away. And to this day, we're still trying to figure out what actually happened to the sister and who did what to the sister. Yep, that picture right there. That's the very same one. You're always going to find racial discrimination and hatred by our oppressor when you're joining something that belongs to him. This is why here in the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, We strongly advocate and suggest and inform and instruct every Black, Hispanic, and Native American to not join the white man's military.
Right.
Don't join the Air Force. Don't join the military, the Army, the Navy. Let the white man and his country and government fight their own wars by themselves. Keep going.
Faced racial discrimination when they received passes to go into the city. A majority of the men had been raised in the South and were familiar with segregation, but as Army servicemen, they expected equal treatment.
What?
They expected equal treatment.
You cannot expect equal treatment from your ex-slave master. You cannot expect equal treatment from those people who look down upon you. It doesn't matter what position of power you have been put in by those same slave masters. It doesn't matter. This thought of having equal treatment is a dream. It's a fallacy. However, the thought of being over them and ruling them and being above them is something that is attainable. If you want to rule over your oppressors, if you want to be over in authority and rulership over the same people that committed atrocities against you and your people, the only thing you can do is to rule over them. There is no equality. There is no dealership with them. It is absolute tyrannical rulership over the people who committed crimes against us. Keep going.
Those individuals responsible for keeping order, especially the police, the police.
And that's what we expect the police to do today in 2023. However, the police, the law enforcement all over America has been engaged in not only drug dealing, prostitution, have committed have been unaliving people who were unarmed. They're still involved in acts of horrendous acts that still show them in such a negative light, which causes the mistrust of Black, Hispanic, and Native American people towards law enforcement today. Because going back to things just like this. Keep going.
Especially the police, streetcar conductors, and public officials viewed the presence of Black soldiers as a threat to racial harmony.
What?
To racial harmony.
They thought that the presence of having Black soldiers in Houston training to fight a war for white people was a threat to racial harmony. You know, I think that living in a society, in a town, in a community where gentrification has been rapidly increasing is also a threat to racial harmony. I think if gentrification was to degress, to minimize, I think there can be more racial harmony within America. If Black and Hispanic and Native American people can live amongst ourselves and be with just ourselves, we can be one step further in being able to rise above the same people that have oppressed us.
Right.
That's a beautiful vision for racial harmony. Keep going.
Many Houstonians thought that if the Black soldiers were shown the same respect as white soldiers, Black residents of the city might come to expect similar treatment.
And we all know white folks don't want to treat us as equals, no matter what position of power we're in. Listen, Kanye West was a billionaire, and Donald Trump still called him a smart cookie in the White House. Right? It doesn't matter what position of power, how much wealth you have, they will always continue to view and look at you as a slave, as less than, until you can be a viable threat and an enemy against them. Just like how they respect the Arabs, just like how they respect the Chinese and President or Prime Minister Xi, whatever his name is. That's the level that we need to be on and surpass that. Keep going.
Black soldiers were willing to abide by the legal restrictions imposed by segregated practices, but they resented the manner in which the laws were enforced.
Cool. Let's go back to this documenting Bubba Show. I think there's a commercial. Like, skip it 5 seconds, Bubba Show. One more. Keep going. Okay, start right there.
Time or two, they throw the screens out the window. I've been working the line all along, from the time they arrived until they left. All of them that rode the cars seem to have hard feelings towards riding behind the screens. Time or two, they throw the screens out the window.
The treatment of the soldiers on trolley cars and elsewhere paled in comparison to the violence the men of the 24th encountered with the police department. Houston Police Department historian Denny Hare.
The police officers of the time were not doing any way to welcome either. They were just as prejudiced as you might think they would have been, because it was a society thing. It was laws that were put into place and enforced that kept a group down.
Ira Rainey came to Houston in search of a better life for his family. He found it with the Houston Police Department. Sandra Heitman speaks of a great-grandfather she never knew.
You know, there was always a sense of pride that he was a police officer. They used to have a lot of abandoned babies, black babies that would be abandoned, and because Grandma Rainey was always pregnant, and that Ira would bring these babies home to her to be nursed. So I can't, reconcile that with him being a racist.
It was a difficult time at best to be a police officer. We only had one black officer at the time.
One of the previous police chiefs said that Houston needed to hire bloodhounds as a part of the police force, and particularly said to control the black people. So I think there was strong animosity against them. And this man, Lee Sparks, represented the worst of it.
Officer Sparks was the guy who, he had a reputation in Freedmanstown of being straight up, not just a racial bully, but an aggressive enforcer of white supremacy.
Dr. Robert Haynes wrote about Officer Sparks in his book, A Night of Violence, considered one of the most comprehensive accounts of the Houston riots.
Sparks was very proud of the fact that he could beat blacks over the head and get their, as he always put it, get their heart right. He always put a notch on his gun every time he shot one.
Sparks and his partner Rufus Daniels patrolled on horseback in the large black neighborhood in Houston's 4th Ward. Today's West Dallas was known as San Felipe, and the area was known as the San Felipe District. It was near here on the morning of August 23rd that Officer Sparks and Daniels spotted 2 black teenagers shooting dice in an alley. The dice shooters soon ran down the alley and right into the home of Mrs. Sarah Travers.
And she was ironing, and it was a hot day. She was dressed appropriately for the hot weather, but inappropriately for house guests. Then the cops came barging into her home and asked, had they seen these 2 crap shooters? And she resented the fact that they had invaded her private home.
Get out! This is my house. You ain't got no right to be here.
And obviously an altercation developed between Mrs. Travers and the 2 policemen, and they arrested her and carried her to a police box where they would call in and get the wagon to come and pick them up and take them to the jail.
So these 2 white cops just barge and bust into the door of this black woman, right? An argument happens. They're trying to look for these 2 people that were gambling, shooting dice, and they ended up arresting her and taking her down to jail, breaking into her own home, illegally detaining her, taking her out of her home and down into the jail. Keep going.
Now, it happened that a black soldier witnessed the screaming of Mrs. Travers, who resented being hauled into the jail, and he tried to come to her assistance.
An angry Officer Sparks pistol whipped the soldier, Private Alonzo Edwards, and took him to jail as well.
See how violent they just naturally are? Instead of just having a regular, normal conversation, this is what police officers, I don't want to say have been trained to do, right? But this is what many of us have experienced, whether personally, from friends or families, or seen from body cam footage or people putting videos on YouTube and TikTok, how some police officers can just escalate instead of de-escalating the situation like they've been trained to do, and just come out and start using violence to get their way or to make things happen the way they want it to happen. Now, again, this is not all police officers. This is not every officer in law enforcement, but there are many law enforcement officers that just extremely jump to violence to make sure they get what they want. Keep going.
When word reached camp, the provost guard on duty, Corporal Charles Baltimore, left for town to track down Officer Sparks.
And Baltimore was a model soldier, what even whites would call a good soldier, loyal, respected by both his officers who were white as well as the enlisted men themselves. And he came to inquire about the events that had taken place. And Sparks resented that. Again, tried to pistol whip Baltimore, who fled from the scene and hid under the bed of a local house. And police officers then finally tracked him down, beat him up, and took him to the police station.
So they just beat this model soldier up. If you were paying attention, he was the best of the best, the top of the top. Everyone loved him because of how much of a great soldier he was. But how dare he think that he could question white people? How dare he step out of his place in society? How dare he think that he can come from the bottom and question some type of great and magnificent and powerful authoritative figure, such as a white police officer in the South? And this is what it led to. Them chasing him, hunting him down, and beating him. Keep going.
And almost immediately, rumors began to spread through the camp that Corporal Baltimore had been killed. Back at police headquarters, Police Chief Clarence Brock confronted Officer Sparks about the 2 injured soldiers he had brought in that day. Sparks would be suspended overnight, pending a decision on further discipline.
And so they decided that they would allow Baltimore to go back to camp so that would prove that he had not been killed.
At camp, rumors persisted, even one that an angry white mob was on the way. Some soldiers became angrier, more agitated. Witnesses would later report that soldiers began stealing and hiding ammunition and circulating plans for retaliation against the white policemen that night. The men had a new commanding officer, Major Nealon Snow, with just 3 days on the job. Unlike his predecessor, Snow had very little contact with the black troops. Despite all the warning signs, he did very little to calm the building tensions. And shortly after nightfall, all the day's anger, injustice, and resentment would come to a boil. Houston, 1917. A military training base is being constructed for troops headed for World War I. Black soldiers were brought in to guard the construction site. Their presence here led to a different type of war on the streets of this segregated city. Even the weather was unsettled that August afternoon. It had been the driest year on record, with temperatures over 100 degrees that summer, and on this fateful day, at last, it finally began to rain. It was a release of pent-up energies that mirrored the situation in camp. A white officer brought Corporal Baltimore back to camp, hoping the news he was alive would calm the angry troops.
When those soldiers saw one of the most loyal black non-commissioned officers abused by a very racist white officer, It incensed them.
Believing things were
And that's what happens when you have such great loyalty to your oppressor. When you have such great loyalty to this oppressor, everyone is just surprised and in disbelief when they see how your oppressor treats the most loyal amongst you. This man, Corporal Baltimore, he was extremely loyal. And when he came back to Camp Logan and everyone saw how beaten and abused he was, they were just in disbelief. Like how many of us are still in disbelief when you find out that another unarmed black man or Hispanic man has been unalived by the police. Like many of us can't believe how these things can still be happening in 2023. The reason why you have trouble accepting this as a fact is because you believe in your mind, in your body, in your soul, that you are equal to them, that you can be just like them, instead of accepting and understanding that you can never be on the same level as your oppressor in his own eyes. You will never be on a leveled playing field to him. That's why you have to separate yourself. Separate yourself and create your own playing field, your own field where you can be dominant, where you can get some type of respect. Keep going, Bubba. Sure.
calming down, Snow and the other white officers still planned to spend a relaxing evening in town.
Major.
Yes.
Sir, may I have a word with you?
In a moment.
But the troops were still upset. And around 8 p.m., Sergeant Vida Henry approached Snow to tell him.
What is it?
I think we're going to have trouble tonight.
What kind of trouble, Sergeant?
Major trouble.
Soon after, Snow ordered all the men to assemble and turn in their rifles, but only a few did. With Sergeant Henry still at his side, Snow encountered a group of armed soldiers.
What's going on this evening? Advising a plan, sir. What kind of plan is that? Can't tell you, sir.
The mutiny had begun. Soldiers rushed the supply tents, overpowering the guards and taking guns and ammunition. They began to fire at random into the darkness. And Sergeant Vida Henry, who had warned Major Snow of trouble, emerged as a leader of the mutiny.
All right, guys, let's do this.
Born in Kentucky, the 35-year-old Henry was a career soldier. In 13 years of dedicated service, Henry had acquired the respect of his own men and white officers alike.
Vida Henry was I think, even more than Baltimore, was a black man who felt that he, as a soldier, deserved to be treated with respect. 30 minutes later, Henry led most of his company, our company, out of the bivouac at a little after 8.
Charles Wright encountered a handful of black soldiers when he ran to see what all the commotion was about. His brother explained what happened.
They phoned me and told me that my brother had been shot, and he was at St. Joseph's Infirmary. He told me that they had surrounded him. He said that they hollered, "Halt!" And when he raised both his arms, they shot him through both arms. And as he fell, they shot him again through his side. And when they were done shooting, they said, "We have got this white son of," and went marching on.
On the way toward Bruner Street, now Shepherd, Henry's column passed a house where 3 teenagers were on the porch. Spotting movement in the darkness, one of the boys told his sister to turn on the porch light, attracting the attention of the soldiers, who then shot out the light, killed one of the boys, and seriously injured another.
The minute things happened, word got out pretty quickly, and the town went berserk. People all over the city heard about it, raced downtown, robbed pawn shops and hardware shops, grabbed pistols. White people were scared to death.
Black Houstonians were frightened too. Henrietta Wells, who was 6 at the time, remembers white policemen entering her home to search for rioters.
And they banged on the door and said, "Open up," something like that. And my mother went to the door. We were there alone. And she opened the door and they said, "We're looking for soldiers." And they didn't even ask her if they could come in. They just pushed her aside and went in. And I was so frightened when those men came in the house, and I didn't know what they were going to do to my mother and me.
Hundreds of white citizens hurried into the downtown business district. They were armed with everything from rifles to slingshots. A second group of 1,000 whites gathered outside the police station, where the chief handed out firearms and sent them into the riot area.
And they poured into the area and ran smack dab into black soldiers as they were heading for in my opinion, the police department, but they never got there.
A third crowd of 400 or 500 gathered at the Bruner Fire Station on Washington, intent on lynching the soldiers still in camp. They were held back by members of the Illinois National Guard from Camp Logan, who by this time had been mobilized to control the riot. Sergeant Vida Henry's men crossed the bayou and marched east toward downtown. The violence continued. They fired on 2 policemen at the corner of San Felipe and Wilson, seriously injuring 1. A car pulled up containing a businessman and 4 police officers, including one of their biggest foes, policeman Rufus Daniels. Daniels charged, armed only with a pistol, and the soldiers shot him down. Remembering his role in the beating of Corporal Baltimore, the men battered Daniels' face with rifle butts and plunged bayonets into him. At Heiner's.
So remembering what that white police officer did to Corporal Baltimore, these black soldiers returned that same treatment to this white officer here. Keep going.
Street, the soldiers encountered another car and killed 2 of its occupants, a civilian and Houston policeman, Ira Rainey.
Well, one of them comes up to the side of the car there and he says, "You get out of there, you damn son of a..." Well, I stepped out of the car then. It was about that time that Rainey, I think, made his run for the front of the car. And when he did, they shot him. They shot him right in front of the car.
Another vehicle containing white soldiers arrived and the men opened fire, killing Captain Joseph Matties. The soldiers had mistaken one of their own for a Houston police officer and gunned him down.
Now, the strange thing, of course, is that the Houston Mounted Police wore khaki uniforms. So it's very clear that the soldiers thought that Mattis was a police officer, not a United States Army officer of the Illinois National Guard. And when they discovered their mistake, I think this had a lot to do with changing the whole psychology of the march on Houston.
I can't go no longer, man.
Vida Henry and the men stopped to rest under a large tree near the railroad tracks, where they argued for almost 2 hours over what they would do next.
Is that all you're concerned about?
That's all I'm concerned about.
Around 2 a.m., the men split up. Corporal Baltimore led a large group that wanted to abandon the raid and headed toward camp. Sergeant Henry, who had been injured in the fighting, refused to join them and asked 3 or 4 of the men to shoot him. They refused.
And Henry was disappointed when even some of his strongest supporters joined those who wanted to go back to the camp. And he told them he was not going back. They, I think, suspected that he was going to kill himself, but they couldn't. They said goodbye to him in a kind of mournful way and left him.
A few minutes later, as they were marching north, they heard a single gunshot. Sergeant Vida Henry's body was found the next morning. His remains are in an unmarked grave here at the College Park Cemetery on West Dallas. In addition to Sergeant Henry, 3 other black soldiers were killed as a result of the riot. The entire riot was over in a matter of hours. 16 whites, including 5 police officers, were killed. Among them, Ira Rainey. His wife was left to raise 8 children alone.
All my mother has really, told me was the poverty, and just in our family, I guess generational poverty came from this with, the boys having to quit school.
Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. Generational poverty. Get out of here with those crocodile tears. You know what generational poverty is? Generational poverty is you having your babies fed to alligators year after year. You being called nothing but a slave for centuries and centuries. You growing up here in the ghetto and your dad's a drug dealer who ends up being unalived and your mom's a drug addict who's not in your life. That's generational poverty. This white woman here, stuff happens in life. What can I say? Yeah? You gotta speak up, okay? Well, this is a white woman here. The white woman is saying that she suffered generational poverty because of this event that happened. Who cares? I don't. Please continue.
School, go to work early.
I think my grandfather carried a lot of that pain. And I knew him, he died when I was about six, but I think he had a lot of pain from that, and a lot of anger. So, because he was a very young teenager at the time it happened, and I just don't think there's any way he could not have been affected by it. And I'm sure his being affected by it affected his children and us on down the line in some fashion.
It was a sad incident. It was an unfortunate incident, not only for my family, but it was an unfortunate incident in the city as well, because the more you read about the riot and how it all took place, it was a very sad set of circumstances, not only for the policemen who were killed, but also for those soldiers that were here at the time.
This is complete and utter BS. You know, the racism that white people had towards black people, and you want people to feel bad for you. The racism and prejudice and the Jim Crow laws that were created to continue to oppress black people, and you want viewers to feel sympathy and compassion for you. This is a devil. You've just heard the testimonies of 3 devils, 2 she devils and 1 he devil. These are the quintessential and perfect example of a devil. Right. They want you to feel sorry for them. They want you to think it was such an unfortunate event. How was it an unfortunate event where your ancestors were oppressing mine? Not just for a day, a month, a year, for centuries. You consider this to be an unfortunate event because white officers were put in an early grave. What about all the black people that were put into early graves as children? What about all the Native Americans and the Mexicans who were put in early graves trying to fight for their people? I have no sympathy for my oppressor, and no matter what struggle he goes through. You know, white on white crime is something that is unfortunate, but white people treat each other horrendously. So it's only a fact that they would treat others this way. I have no sympathy for you. I'm too concerned about having to deal with the trauma and ordeal of my people from things like this that happen. For mothers who grew up, who had to grow old without their sons and daughters. For children who had to grow up without their fathers or their mothers in their life. For children that had to be put into the foster system because their parents were addicted to drugs and would beat them because they didn't know any other way to take out their anger or the aggression. That's who I have sympathy for. Right. Not for my oppressor that wants some type of sympathy and empathy for some unfortunate event of white people abusing and discriminating against black people, which caused the riot. You will get no tears from me. Keep going.
Several of Ira Rainey's descendants pursued careers in law enforcement. After the riot, demands for retribution were swift and loud. Rumors swept through both black and white communities, and an atmosphere of fear and distrust. Police raided black neighborhoods, confiscating weapons and making arrests.
But all I know was the next night, everybody was scared to get out, scared to move, because it's thought the riot would come over that part of the country.
Well, you know, there was kind of a bad spirit between the blacks and the whites. Every time you went to the stores downtown, everybody just looked at you rather weirdly, you know, and you were afraid. You were really afraid because the tension was just high.
Fearing civilian retaliation, the military put all the black troops on a train less than 2 days after the riot, despite protests from city leaders.
City officials were absolutely chagrined, and I guess maybe even horrified by the military decision to pull the soldiers out immediately and to send them back to Columbus, New Mexico, because they wanted to try these soldiers. They were convinced that these crimes had taken place in their jurisdiction, and they wanted to see to it, quote unquote, that justice be done. And only in their hands could justice be done.
Yeah, because there is no justice unless a white man is carrying out a death sentence to his slave. That's justice for him. The white man doesn't consider justice for the oppression that he has caused against these black citizens of Houston, Texas. There's no justice for that. There's no justice for white people discriminating and treating black soldiers with hatred. There's no justice for that. But there is justice for the white man whenever his people are unalived. The white man definitely will make sure he gets some type of retribution, some type of justice for the loss of his own, like what happened in 9/11. The white man definitely got justice for the unaliving and the destruction of his people and their glorious Twin Towers. But there's still no justice for Eric Garner. There's still no justice for Tamir Rice. Right. There's still no justice for Akir Gurley. Right. There's still no justice for Sandra Bland. There's still no justice for all the Native Americans that have perished from the hands of the United States government. And there's still no justice because on Thursday, everyone is going to celebrate Thanksgiving, which is the genocide of Native Americans. There's still no justice for that. But the white man will get justice whenever something horrendous happens to him. Damn sure that's one fact you can count on. You can always bet on the house. He will get his revenge. Keep going, please.
The military began its own investigation. The Houston Citizens Review Committee began hearings less than a week after the riot. The committee heard testimony from 92 Houstonians on what happened that night. It didn't matter that many of them were not eyewitnesses. Everyone had an opinion on why the riot happened. Some witnesses put the blame on alcohol and immorality, or on the character of the soldiers and the many.
Of course, blame it on drugs. Blame it on these black soldiers were just high. Blame it on alcohol. These black soldiers were drunk. Blame it on some type of immorality. There's something wrong with them. They have no morals. They're just savages and beasts and monsters. And this is why they needed to be enslaved in the first place. Of course, that is what the white man would say. Of course, that is what the media would promote, right? But that is not the truth. That is not the case. These men were proud soldiers. They were the Buffalo Soldiers who had all the respect from everyone that ever came up against them. And you dared to think that they would reduce themselves and their honor to overindulgence in drugs and alcohol and lack of morality, a lack of a moral compass? The army helps you build fiber, right? The army helps you build a quality standard of living, to hold yourself in a high regard, to build morals. But all of a sudden, now when white lives have been lost, They will use anything to diminish the value of you, of us. Keep going, please.
Many black citizens who came to visit the camp. Others criticized the white military officers for failing to keep the troops in line. In one of the few moves that pleased black citizens, the civil service rules were changed to make Officer Sparks' mistreatment of black citizens grounds for suspension. He was strongly criticized in the committee's final report, but they otherwise held the police blameless. But there were no speeches about the long history of friction between police and black Houstonians.
By the standards of 1917, they were enforcing the laws. The laws were wrong by those standards then and by our standards now, but they were enforcing the law. Were they wrong? Were they brutal? Yes. Should they have done it the way they did even back then? No. But it happened. Should the soldiers have mutinied? No. Should there have been some system to stop this? Yes. Was there? No. Did they learn anything from it? No. Because they didn't talk about it.
Blacks were reluctant to express their true feelings, but many of them decided to leave Houston.
Within the black community itself, I think local blacks, Houston-based, Houston-born blacks, really saw that they could no longer be unquestioningly acquiescent, that they truly had to organize, that they really, and furthermore, the example of these soldiers to lay down their lives had to have had an effect.
While the citizens' hearings were underway, the Army was gathering evidence for the military trials to follow. Investigators were able to obtain a few confessions, but most of the accused maintained a vow of silence then and for the rest of their lives. The first court-martial began on Thursday, November 1st, here at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. During the trial, the 63 soldiers were held here. They were guarded by members of Company C of the 19th Infantry. Officially known as U.S. versus Nesbitt, the trial was held in the base's newly constructed Gift Memorial Chapel. A high-ranking court of brigadier generals, colonels, and lieutenant colonels sat in judgment on Sergeant William A. Nesbitt and 62 others for a long list of charges, ranging from disobeying orders to murder. It was the largest court-martial ever held in the continental United States. Colonel John Hull was assigned to prosecute, assisted by Major Dudley Sutphin, both experienced attorneys. Major Harry Greer was assigned to represent the defendants. A career soldier with almost no trial experience, he ended up working alone after his assistant was pulled to be a witness for the prosecution.
You don't have to be an attorney to defend under the Military Code of Justice. And Greer was not. Greer was just an officer who had at one time been associated with the 24th Infantry. And he understood, I think, the black soldier better maybe than some of the other officers would have. But he had no training.
In all, 194 individuals testified at the trial, many of them eyewitnesses to the events. 7 were soldiers who had admitted their participation in exchange for leniency.
We all rushed the supply tent and got our guns. Someone there was pitching ammunition right out the box. Sergeant Henry asked, "Has everybody got their ammunition?"
In deciding which soldiers to charge, the prosecution relied mostly on roll call lists compiled in haste, in darkness, in the middle of the mutiny. It is likely that some of those charged had not participated in the riots, and that some who had were never charged.
Because the truth of the matter is, they couldn't identify any of these people.
Couldn't even identify who some of these people were, but you're just going to convict the lot of them for crimes that they may or may not have committed. That is not justice. And that is exactly what the white man does to us today. Right. Take the Central Park Five, for example. 5 innocent Black and Hispanic kids who committed no crime against a white female jogger back in the late 80s, early 90s, and were treated as the most violent and disgusting people on the face of this earth, who were innocent. Keep going.
The whites who were wounded could not identify a single soldier. The only evidence they had was what these immunity witnesses told them.
The defense presented witnesses who contradicted the testimony of informants. T.C. Hawkins was one of the accused, yet one soldier swore he had remained in the camp.
Yes, sir. Somebody touched me. He say, "Say, fella, can I sleep on your blanket?" I say, "Who was that?" He say, "Hawkins." He say, "I got tired of laying up under the trees. I thought I'd lay down." So I say, "Sure, help yourself."
In closing arguments, the prosecution held that all of the defendants were responsible for the killings, even if no one could prove they were directly involved. Summarizing the defense, Major Greer reminded the court of the soldiers' mistreatment by police, the lack of evidence of a conspiracy, the likelihood that many marched with Henry because they were afraid or were following orders, and he pointed out the many contradictions in eyewitness accounts. But his arguments did not move the court, which announced its decisions on the morning of Thursday, November 28th, less than a month after the trial began.
Brought to you in part by Academy Sports.
And little more than 3 months after the violent incidents of August 23rd, the military court in San Antonio announced the verdicts. 54 of the 63 soldiers were found guilty of all charges. 4 were declared guilty of willfully disobeying orders by leaving camp. 41 were sentenced to confinement at hard labor for the term of their natural lives. 5 were acquitted. 13 men were found responsible for masterminding the mutiny or leading the march. They were sentenced to be hanged. One of them was Charles Baltimore, whose arrest sparked the mutiny. Also sentenced to be executed, Jesse Moore and T.C. Hawkins.
You would think that somebody somewhere up the line would say, hey, we need to stop. We need to take another look at this. We need to, examine this again. But nobody did.
The mass execution took place in secret at dawn on December 11th by the banks of Salado Creek. The men had not been told of their impending execution until that very morning.
There was no press coverage. The Army thought it would be a spectacle if they had the news media there, so they circulated a rumor that the execution was going to be carried out at Leon Springs, which is about 20 miles away. And the reporters headed for Leon Springs, so none of them were present during the execution.
Despite great security from officers expecting the worst, the men surrendered to their fate peacefully and with dignity as they awaited their death. No one wept, and none of the men begged for mercy. Over 200 soldiers and law enforcement officers were assembled to prevent any trouble at the execution. After the men mounted the platform, a black minister and 2 white chaplains led a short prayer. The officer in charge said attention, and the men began singing a hymn. Their final words were a farewell to their guards, saying, "Goodbye, boys of Company C." As the men stood at attention looking straight ahead, the officer brought his raised arms down. The trap door swung open, and the men dropped 9 feet, meeting death, in the words of a witness, with neither bravado or fear. The men were buried in unmarked graves along Salado Creek, where they remained until 1937, when the Army needed the area for training purposes.
And one of the persons investigating the situation determined that the soldiers had not been dishonorably discharged before they were hanged, as would have been appropriate. So they were authorized burial in the National Cemetery.
Their fate was sealed in part because of their outrage over segregation in the city of Houston. Ironically, in death, these black soldiers became the first to integrate Fort Sam Houston Cemetery. For many, many years, the mothers and fathers of the soldiers had no idea exactly where their sons were buried. It was 17 years before Angela Holder's family got answers.
It made the family very sad. Like I said before, it was this big question mark. It was a big mystery. Where was Jesse? What really happened to him?
For others, the burden was almost too much to bear.
It tore my grandfather apart. He suffered greatly on that because he was very close to his sons. And according to my aunt, what she said was that my grandfather really never recovered from the tragedy.
Even in death, T.C. Hawkins declared his innocence. This letter arrived at his parents' home after he was hanged.
Dear Mother and Father, when this letter reaches you, I will be beyond the veil of sorrow. I will be in heaven with the angels. Mother, don't worry over your son because
it is heaven's gain. Look not upon my body as one that must fill a watery grave, but one that is asleep in Jesus. I fear not death. I am sentenced to be hanged for the trouble that happened in Houston, Texas, although I am not guilty of the crime that I am accused of. But Mother, it is God's will that I go now, and in this way. Mother, I'm gonna look for you and the family. If possible, I will meet you at the river. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. I will give thee rest. Bless his holy name.
So these soldiers ended up giving up their lives for injustice, right? This treatment that they received in Esau's military and the white man's military should be a lesson to every Black, Hispanic, and Native American that thinks that they should join the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. Recently, leading up to this, Netflix has a plethora of war movies, right? And for the past, and each day I watch like 2 war movies that show the cruelty and the horrendous actions of white people in war, right? And I couldn't even imagine being here in the truth now, how you can sit and watch a movie like that as a Black, Hispanic, or Native American man, and watch a movie about called 13 Hours in Bangladesh or something like that, or The Outpost. I couldn't even fathom why I would want to be part of that military. Like, there's nothing that can inspire me to want and go and enlist and fight insurgents. Growing up and learning about the World Trade Center and 9/11 incident, nothing about that would inspire me to want to go fight on behalf of my oppressor, knowing that he's only going to treat me in the most horrendous ways possible. When soldiers came back from war, World War I, World War II, they were treated like garbage. They were beaten on buses. They were lynched by their ties. Why would we want to be part of our enemy's army, to fight for him, to bring him glory? These men ended up giving up their lives for nothing. They joined the white man's military for nothing. It was over 100 years before any type of real justice even happened. And we're going to get to that because November either, I think it's November 10th of this year, November 10th just passed. They finally got some type of justice after over 100 years later. Keep playing the documentary, please. So after that, 2 more court martials followed, right? In the end of everything, all but 8 men were charged and convicted. 118 men, right? 29 were given death sentences, and the others were given long-term prison sentences. Keep going, Baba Shah. Once released, most of the men moved to northern cities. Keep going. Right? Great documentary. You know, white people are good for making good documentaries, especially when they snitch on themselves. But let's go to this article right here. If you can share this, right? This is from, scroll up, Baba Shah. This is from the Death Penalty Information Center, right? Read this, Baba Shah.
On November 13th, 2023, officials announced that the U.S. Army had overturned the convictions of 110.
Did what?
Overturned the convictions.
They overturned the convictions. After over 100 years later, they decided to overturn the convictions. Keep going.
Of 110 black soldiers of the 3rd Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment, who were charged.
So, correction, this happened November 13th. Today is November 20th, right? If I'm not mistaken. Today's November 20th. 7 days earlier, the Army apologized and overturned the convictions of these black soldiers. Keep going.
Who were charged with mutiny in connection with the racial violence that occurred during the 1917 Camp Logan Rebellion. 19 black soldiers were hanged following the court-martial ruling on December 11th, 1917, which was the largest execution of military soldiers in history.
What?
The largest execution of military soldiers in history.
And they did it to us. That's who they did it to. They executed black soldiers, the largest in military history. Keep going.
In her statement, Secretary of the Army Christine Wormuth stated, "These soldiers were wrongly treated because of their race and were not given fair trials."
What?
Wrongly treated because of their race.
Who isn't? What story have we been involved in that we weren't wrongly treated because of our race? We are always wrongly treated because of our race in this criminal system here in America. We're always that. What will continue on with the next part?
During the Jim Crow era, the black soldiers of the 24th Infantry Regiment were continuously harassed by racist police and white locals.
They were what?
While continuously harassed by racist police and white locals.
Now, if the military, brothers in the military who are supposed to have some type, who you would think would have some type of respect, they're being harassed by white police officers and white locals, what makes you think you would be treated any less differently? What makes you think you would be treated less differently here in 2023? There's no difference to the treatment that our oppressor will place upon you. Keep going.
While stationed at Camp Logan, a military training camp in Houston, on August 23rd, 1917, Corporal Charles Baltimore was beaten and shot by police after interfering in the arrest of a black woman. In response to this incident, black soldiers marched in protest into Houston, which resulted in a violent confrontation with a white mob. In a recent article in The Defender, journalist Aswad Walker reported that Gabe Camarillo, the 35th Undersecretary for the Army, acknowledged the wrongs of the racially biased ruling by granting honorable discharges to the black soldiers during the ceremony held at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum. Camarillo also established a plan to provide benefits to the survivors' families through a partnership.
A what?
A plan to provide benefits to the survivors' families.
So after 100 years, over 100 years, from 1917 to 2023, what's that, 105 years, 106 years? Right, something like that. Over a century later, that's what that is, a century later, now you want to try to give them some type of rights or some type of benefits? A century year later? There is no justice. Justice would have been fixing the issue when it actually happened. Justice would have been correcting these white police officers who were unprofessional. If you were listening to the beginning of the documentary, they had a new commanding officer in the white police force who was trying to modernize and make them more professional. They lacked professionalism, right? If you wanted justice, you should have helped change their behavior. But instead, they were allowed to be racist. They were allowed to be prejudiced. They were allowed to beat unarmed black people whenever, indiscriminately, whenever they wanted to. There is no justice that could ever replace what had happened. It is too late for justice. Right now, it's the time for a revolution. And that revolution should start with you, with each and every one of you, Black, Hispanic, and Native American people. The revelation should start within your mind, having a stronger moral compass, deciding whether you want to serve the Lord or not. Keep going.
Attorney Jason Holt, a descendant of Private First Class Thomas Hawkins, stated, "Today, a mortal blow has been dealt to the injustice of the master-slave relationship, such that 106 years later, the color of their skin was not a barrier to the fair dispensation of military jurisprudence, and we all here rejoice that their convictions were overturned and set aside."
Yeah, there's no need for rejoicing. Those brothers are not alive to benefit from it. Their ancestors are here alive who probably never met them. What kind of rejoice can you get from that? Not being able to hug your grandfather, right? Having to hear stories of your father growing up without a father, your mother growing up without a father. There's very little to rejoice about that. All right. What time is it? 8:49. Okay, perfect. Let's go to StreamYard. Let's see if there's any comments or questions on the topic that we taught here today. Okay, I see a couple of comments. Okay. All right. Shout out to all the brothers from California to Texas to Chicago, all over the map that tuned in for today's class. Shout out to all the sisters that tuned in for today's class. I'm Priest Ashar. We're going to end the class now. I'm Priest Ashar Gapan of the ISUPK, Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge. Started out at 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York. Since 1969, we've been teaching this truth. And under Commanding General Yohana, we've been spreading this truth of the Bible and who Black, Hispanic, and Native American people are all over, right? And then with that, Shalom, Yahushua to the brothers, Yahushua to the sisters. That's a wrap.